Welcome back to Chasing Squirrels. This morning, I am talking with Deborah Austring. Deborah, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning.
So, as I've mentioned to you in our on-ramp, and I've mentioned to others, I would appreciate if you could throw down a little bit of an introduction for yourself.
My name is Deborah Austring. I am an educator and an administrator in a large school board north of Toronto. And primarily, I'm a wife and mother, but I am an administrator. But I do value my role as a wife and mother first.
I love that. And that was a big part of the on-ramp. I always consider to be kind of protected territory. I'm never going to direct quote. I don't have any recordings of it. There's no snippets where I'm like, hey, Deborah, remember in the intro you said this? Or myself for that matter. What I dig about the big part of the on-ramp, though, was that shape of kind of making EDU stuff dance with school, with like life stuff. And, finding the time in the summer to drop into a chat about school is, it's not simple. So I love that you're leading with that, sort of like the family connection on the front end. Because like I mentioned to you, at any point, I could hear something crash upstairs. And just for any listeners, like I've got this little corner recording studio in my basement, and it's quiet as long as it's not. So, it's that you're sort of listening for the sounds upstairs. Is that a happy cry or is that a sad cry? So, before we get rolling too deep into it, I would love to hear. You've mentioned educator, administrator. Curious, how did EDU find you? How did school, becoming the educator? If you dig back, roll back the tape, how did who found whom?
Interesting. I always say that if you knew me in high school and you know me now, you'd be very surprised that I was in education and even more surprised that I'm an administrator. I didn't like high school. I wasn't a very confident student, but I did well enough to get into university. And my older sister is a teacher as well. And she was teaching by the time I was in university and seemed to be enjoying it and finding value in it. And so as I was going through university and landed on being an English major with a love of literature and figuring out what I was going to do with that, I decided that education is where I wanted to be. And I knew I wanted to work with teenagers, specifically because I did not like high school and I wanted to try and make it a different experience. And so I found education through modeling of my sister, and then taught for 2 years in the States where I grew up, and then met a cute Canadian and came up here, and have been teaching up here ever since, and have really developed a passion for and an interest in students with various learning needs. So I've spent most of my career working in special education or working in situations where students were at risk in some way. And then I was challenged by administrators that I worked with and others in my professional realm who encouraged me to seek out opportunities for leadership. So I did so and took it one step at a time. And here I am as a vice principal.
I've had that conversation before. I'm kindred. I'm a kindred spirit with that high school experience. Not to the point where I would say that I had any sort of wall that I put up against school. It wasn't that I necessarily didn't want to be there. I didn't want to take my courses. If I had to put it purely on an engagement scale, for me, it was that I preferred working in restaurants. Like there was something I caught that bug very, very early. So in grade 9, my birthday is late. So you had to be at the time, I think you had to be 14, whatever the age was. I was a year short of it. So it was the summer just before grade 9. I applied to work. You remember the restaurant Golden Griddle?
I do.
So yeah, so a buddy of mine who is already of age, he applied and he got a busboy job, and he's like, yeah, you should come and do this. And so I did it too, lied about my age, said I was older, got the job. But it was interesting. I caught the bug, and I caught the really held on to that energy of work and being paid for work. And it was funny what that kind of what that morphed into was, um, my time at school became kind of the distraction. It was an inverted, like it sort of flipped. It flipped the formula a little bit. When often, some of the students that I've worked with right now, they're like, oh yeah, Friday night I'm working the whole weekend. I was on the other side. I'm like, oh, I can't wait. And I was just kind of tolerating my classes. I knew I had to sort of hold my B, my low B, to keep family and people off my back. Basically, I guess that what it came down to. Um, and it's interesting because I've talked with other people that are teachers, but they don't see the path to landing. It was sort of like a surprise of becoming a
Mhm.
teacher. What can you speak to what it was? What was it about the high school experience that wasn't connecting with you, or that, looking back on that experience, it's like, yeah, there was no path to becoming a teacher. What was it about it?
I think I just didn't like what I was learning. It was very prescriptive
Mm,
and not very relevant to me. And it felt the sort of different stratospheres within the school social scene was dictated by how engaged you were in school and what your marks were and where your path was. So I sort of rejected that, and I didn't want to be identified as one thing or another, and maybe wasn't a very confident student either. So I didn't maybe put myself out there as much as I could have, but I didn't find the learning to be very relevant. There were maybe a few classes here and there along the way that I enjoyed more than others, but I can't say that I really plugged into anything in an academic sense that sort of drove my passion or lit anything in me. And I think that's sad, because I think as youth, teenagers, there's so much passion, and properly directed or engaged, it can be very powerful. So it's more the, I guess, the engagement with the learning. I just didn't really see the relevance of it. And
do you find yourself drawing, like, do you draw forward from those experiences? Is that a part of your, sort of part of the fabric of your operating system now? Like, is it, are those experiences creating sort of like a mindfulness in you now, as far as what you sort of watch for and engagement? um or is that part sort of settled? It's sort of like new learning that's sort of keeping you aware in your role as an educator, as administrator, or are you still sort of drawing back there and saying, yeah, like, I remember kid in front of me, I remember when I was kind of wrestling through this back in the day. What's the driver there? Are you going back in time to sort of like energize yourself?
maybe a little in some ways. I always say that who of us is the same person we were when we were 16?
Hmm.
We've all evolved so much and had different life experiences contributing to who we are today. And when we look at the 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, and older and younger before us, if we are to judge them by the moment we're in with them, that's really denying that evolution that they're going to face. So to really see beyond what we're facing in front of our desks or in our current experience with the student. And I think about that and think, okay, what's driving that student, and what does that student find exciting, and how can we channel that into the learning today to help them on their path of who they evolve into, who they develop into, whether it be personally, professionally, academically. So I'm very interested in project-based learning or inquiry model learning. I'm very interested in how that bumps up against the fact that we still have 10 months in a school year and a curriculum to get through, and 5 months, at least in a high school, 5 months in which to teach that curriculum and expectations to hit. So how do we marry the student-driven, self-directed, inquiry-based learning within the construct of a curriculum that you have to hit? So some courses, maybe it's a little bit more straightforward. Some courses it's maybe more challenging, but I'm really intrigued by and interested in teachers that do that really well, or at least experiment with it and try it and take risks. Being a special education teacher or teaching in community classes, or a learning strategies class, I maybe had a little bit more play with that, and really making learning relevant to the student and their needs for what they needed post secondary. So it's I think I'm very interested and intrigued by that.
So, coming through faculty, when you were, I guess you sort of mentally committed, like, okay, I'm gonna become a teacher. I'm gonna become an educator.
Mm-hmm.
Were
Mm-hmm.
you clear right from the get go that you wanted to land at secondary?
Yes.
You were. Why is that?
Mhm.
What was the motivator there?
I never liked, um, I guess I never felt drawn to working with younger children. Of course, I did babysitting and so forth when I was a teenager, but I can't say it excited me. Um, can't say I felt especially drawn to it. So when I thought about uh, learning and in my career, I was more drawn to older students. I also was an English major, and I love literature and teaching literature and literary theory, and in my previous incarnation professionally. So I knew that was more possible in high school. So when I was certified to teach in the States, I grew up in Virginia and did my training in Virginia. The certification worked a little bit differently. You were certified either K to 6 or 7 to 12. So I was certified 7 to 12. So I started teaching in a middle school. And then when I moved to Ontario, it was basically high school or a K to 8 model. So I would have liked to maybe spend more time in the middle years, but when I moved to Ontario, is pretty much 9 to 12 is where I landed.
Yeah, I have a similar, I get that. I have a similar sort of thread to me landing in high school. It in some ways, the fact that I was so hospitality became the mainstay when I finished university. It was the through line right from grade 9, like I
Mhm,
mentioned. So it was always the thing that was kind of financing my life, and it
mhm,
financed all the things that I kind of wanted to do. And uh, it kind of afforded me stuff in high school, and then in university I was working in restaurants and the university events on campus, and then a roadhouse in town. So it was always, I always had, again, I'm doing post-secondary in the same way that I did secondary, kind of tolerating getting the degree
mhm.
and looking forward to being in the kitchen, that night, or working the bar. But coming out, so when the conversation happened around moving away from hospitality, so I was uh, working restaurants in Toronto and sort of thinking to myself, it's time for a change. And it was my spouse that mentioned, well, why don't you think about teaching? And I was like, I don't know. But then and it was funny because I was like, why would they? I was falling more on that. Why would they take me? Like, I've been thumbing my nose at education pretty much like since high school, like, really, like. And then it ended up they were looking for tech teachers. So at that time, at the
Mhm,
particular sort of moment in time, they're looking for tech teachers, and I had an undergraduate degree, so it was quite simple to sort of move in. But it was the
mhm,
tech that kind of drove where I was going to end up, because the ability to teach hospitality in itself only existed in the high school. um,
mhm,
it's an interesting kind of spin now, though, where I've landed now working in an ASD community classroom,
mhm,
because now I'm doing hospitality in an ASD community classroom. And it's not that I'm suggesting, it's this the things that I could have learned about trying to teach hospitality and culinary if I had gone into middle school would
mhm,
be incredibly useful right now to me,
mhm,
because I'm having to work backwards from a neurotypical classroom and sort of working on a plan that sort of accommodates a lot more diversity of ways of
right.
thinking. And I'm thinking it's just funny how the loops come around. So starting in a space, because I could have, at the time, I probably could have figured out a way to teach in middle school or elementary school, but it just seemed like if you want to teach cooking, you got to be in the high school for a tech class. And
Right.
I hear that in almost in what you're saying. Like, if you want to teach the classics and sort of go hardcore on the literature,
Mhm,
you got to go to high school.
mhm, mhm,
So thinking back on, you just had this idea, so you're gonna go to high school. Any and also you saying, like, teaching wasn't necessarily the space that you're going to aim for. um when did the reality set in that, okay, so this is the it's first day of class, it's September, it's August, oh my gosh, I'm walking into a classroom in September. Sometimes I put it to grade nines before. I'm like, at what point after grade 8 did you realize you weren't going back to
Yeah.
Mr. Jones's class anymore? You do have to move forward into this next space. What was that like, that first year?
Um, it was exciting. It was new territory. I felt prepared in the sense that my teacher training was a concurrent program in the States. Went to Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, where right near where I grew up, and uh, the part of the program there was you very graduated as far as your engagement and like a leading up to student teaching. So we had certain number of weeks where we were in a school observing, then another certain number of weeks where we were doing a practicum, which was part observing, part engaging in teaching and lesson planning and assessment. And then we had 2 full semesters, I believe, or sorry, 2 halves of a semester in 2 different schools as student teaching. So we were in schools quite a bit. So I felt I had an opportunity to get my feet wet and felt prepared. And then I graduated because I changed my major and with a focus on teaching. I graduated a semester later than I would have. So I substitute taught, supply taught for the spring semester. So I had the benefit of having a couple of consecutive long-term occasional opportunities. So again, it allowed me to get a bit of a context and a comfort level in a non-threatening way. I had the opportunity to lean on my colleagues in those long-term supply teaching positions. And so when I started in a contract position the following fall, I was very excited and eager. And we taught on a team, which I thought was great. It was in a middle school, and we had pods or teaching teams made up of each different discipline, language arts, math, science, etc., and with a lead teacher who was more seasoned. So again, I felt very supported, and I had someone to lean on. Still very scary in some ways. You're now responsible for this group of students, and it was a definitely fall and you pick yourself back up and you try again but it was exciting and a little scary, but I felt prepared, so I can't say that I was nerve wracked or anything like that. I now say, 26 years in, I believe now I've been in education. I often say, whether it's working with students with special needs and or with autism or the students I taught in my first couple of years, I wish I could go back and apologize to them because I could do it better now, knowing what I know now. And so I look back and sometimes cringe and sometimes smile. I think about how I did things or what I did, and now knowing more and maybe have a little bit more maturity and more skills and more confidence, I would have done things differently a little bit.
I'd like to expand on that. If I could, if the question that'll swing back your way is,
Mm.
anything in particular come to mind that you'd like to apologize for? But I'll
Mm.
lead. I'll throw in because I remember my first year, and there was something about, like, I moved very quickly from the thinking about what am I going to do next to shifting out of the restaurant. Actually, I was working in the restaurant. I was still managing a restaurant that I was at and doing um, faculty faculty of ed at the same time. It was sort of like school during the day and then working. This model kept on playing out right up until right up until becoming a teacher. And I remember moving through the 1 year program, and then one of the practicum placements that I had, I was offered a job right away. So I had done a practicum. There was like less than a month off. And then with the staffing cycle, I was offered something right away. So 2 months later, I was in front of a classroom, in front of students teaching hospitality. I was also teaching the intro to Anthro course, the HSP course. And in that first year, I had a real hard time figuring out what was going wrong in the class, like why I couldn't make things happen. And that's really that's quite specific language. I couldn't make things happen. And I only realized about halfway through second semester that I was trying to make students into staff members.
Mm.
And my compassion and empathy, I think, was kind of like, it was just at a drip. Like I was really, so I was managing the students. That's what it was. I was like managing,
Mm.
I was running a restaurant. And it wasn't until I kind of opened up that space that I realized I had to kind of play differently. And part of what was really trippy in that first year is that many of the students, that I was working with reminded me of staff members. Like I would think to myself, honestly, I would think to myself as I'm sort of going through what I would now call, let's say, a counseling or a mentorship moment. I would have then just called it, I was like managing this moment. And, the student that I'm looking at, I'm like, I remember you. I know you. You're Mike. You're the younger version of
Mm,
Mike from the restaurant that I was just working at. And it was amazing um, how trapdoor that became. Like, it really trapped my thinking, because then I was like, okay, how did I work with Mike in this moment? And I'm looking at like a 15, 16-year old. Like, the tools are not, the toolkit's different. So I had a
mm,
real hard
mhm.
time that first year of teaching. Like, I would believe that um, I probably floated between entertainer, hardcore chef, and just kind of cold, like just kind of coming off a little bit cold, because
Mhm.
I didn't have, I think part of it was the expediency of my path into the classroom. Like, it was so quick.
Mm. Yeah.
I could have done better. I could have learned more. Over that summer, I took my spec ed 1, so I was still learning over the summer. I thought, this is a space that um, it was an area of learning that I didn't know I had an interest in, but it was one of the few AQs you could take when you like have
Mhm.
no experience in the
Right.
classroom. So I thought, I'm going to get a little bit more. This will help me. I was also aware that the faculty I went to offered nothing. Nothing. I
Mm,
had one teacher that had mentioned it was like a 2-day kind of seminar talking about supporting special education, and it kind of piqued my
mhm,
interest. The way that they taught and the way they talked about EDU, I thought, you know what, I want to learn some more. So I thought, let's get that
mm,
AQ. But 2 months later, I'm in the classroom with
mm.
nothing's rooted. So that was me, entertainer, or like, or yeah,
Yeah.
manager, cold, cold.
Mhm.
How's about you? What apologies,
Yeah,
teachers from students from a while back. I'd like to formally apologize for something that I did.
yeah, absolutely. I think the earliest in my career was being very conscious of curriculum. I had a curriculum to get through and these expectations, and this is what these education experts said how to do it and what to do and when to do, rather than and that being my focus, rather than I have 30 humans in front of me with 30 different realities and needs, and I'm teaching them first. So you know as I've evolved as a teacher, I now say this as a teacher and I say this as an administrator. We teach students, not curriculum. We teach students first, and we need to engage them first. So I wish I could go back and do things over, that I look at the students first and how to enter them into the curriculum instead of how to take this curriculum and pound it into the students, right? So I think that piece, because I felt very accountable. We had a curriculum, and we had a very different teacher performance appraisal in the States where I taught, where we were visited unannounced by our department head and our administrator for formal evaluations or formal assessments. We had to submit our lesson plans. We had to regularly. So there was a lot of accountability for how we were doing things and what boxes we were ticking, and how we were delivering curriculum. So I felt very accountable to the curriculum and to my administrators. So I think that pressure um, perhaps contributed to my um, pounding of curriculum, rather than looking at how do I deliver this curriculum to these 30 humans in front of me, and where they are in their learning and their lives. So that piece is from early on. I think then as I became a special education teacher and working in community classes, similar to you, I had a certain level of training experience. I had, I've always worked with students with learning disabilities. I had my spec ed 1, 2, 3, and go into, and it continued to learn by going to seminars and workshops and reading and so forth. And then teaching in a community class, and then a few years later discovering structured teaching and supportive students with autism. When structured teaching is an approach, and you probably know of it, teaching with an ASD class, where it's a lot of visuals and structure and schedules and building on transitions and so forth. And the more I learned about that, the more I tried to embed it in my teaching. And I became, then when I moved on to be a regional teacher working with students with behavioral needs, it's like, oh, I want to go back and try that now with all that I learned in those regional roles. I wanted to go back and become a teacher again, and or be in a classroom again, I should say, and implement those things and try those things out. So I wish I could go back to my early days of special education and implement these uh, structured teaching methods and in a more I did it some, but I wish I had the opportunity to go back and do it in a way that was maybe more intentional and expand on what I was doing.
There's something interesting as you're sort of talking about the different performance appraisal system stateside, um, and the language around expectations versus standards. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the American lingo, right? Like
Yep.
you're the
Yep.
standards. And it's funny how if that sets the soil for how
Mm-hmm.
what grows out of it, I can see how our our language, the language that we use in our province, is it sets a different direction that or a different possible direction because there are individuals that would adhere to expectations in much the same way that you've experienced in a previous version, that idea that it's the check boxes to get through. But it is
Mm-hmm.
interesting to it's interesting, and part of this is me sort of playing in some of the digital professional PLN spaces that I'm in. um, I'm constantly having to recontextualize, like kind of pull myself back whenever I'm in a conversation, because I really don't know the American system in the way that I know the Ontario system. And I
Mm-hmm.
know even in saying the American system, I could say the district system or the state system, but it strikes me that there's more harmony state to state in regards to sort of like, the standard language than, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
with us throughout Canada. Side note, crack up. I love going to Costco and you can get a book that's like a math primer, and it says Canadian expectations. And I think
Right.
to myself, I don't know who makes that, but like, there's no such thing. They don't work like that. They're
Yeah.
provincial. But yeah, the idea of the standards and expectations kind of shift intention,
Mm-hmm.
I think.
And I think my sister's still an educator in Virginia, and in conversations with her, and again, my understandings of the variability and um, districts and states and their education and assessment models, I think the differences are, if I could overgeneralize, that the learning in Ontario and the learning in maybe British Columbia and the learning in Texas and Virginia, New York, there's similar learning happening, but the accountability to the expectations, to the curriculum, and um, to your governing body, I guess, might be what's different, and how your administrators or your superintendents or higher ups are enforcing and how they're communicating those expectations and what students have to demonstrate and by what means. So whether it's um, I know we in Ontario don't always uh, agree with or see eye to eye on the amount of provincial assessments that happen and standardized tests that happen. But there's some districts in the U.S. There's a lot more, and they're higher stakes than what we have in Ontario. So I think that the mechanism by which students and teachers have to demonstrate the meeting of those standards or expectations is more where the variability lies, I think, and where some of the stress and pressure lies. In my overgeneralized um, armchair observer of what's
Yeah.
happening.
Well, and just to sort of piggyback on that, anyone who's checking out, our conversation right now and is considering sort of dipping into even using something like Twitter or a professional learning network that is digital. And it's taken me a while to kind of develop this sensibility, like where I need to do more work is asking questions about how is your district constructed, like what are the sort of
Mhm.
the guiding rules there to try and understand it, and then starting to get some shape of how certain hot topics are popping up in your feed, because
Mhm.
it's really easy to sort of misappropriate a conversation, especially if I solely use an Ontario context to understand what's going on in somebody else's school board
Mhm.
or district. So I found myself recently kind of asking them flat out, do you want to do this in an open combo, or can we DM or email? Because I have very specific, right now I'm in a very specific conversation with someone that I've met via Twitter in the States, in San Francisco, asking them about hiring practices in their district.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
some of their posts, individuals, you kind of go like, there's something about that post. And then everyone kind of dog piles on it and comment. But you
Mhm.
kind of go back and like, but there's something about that post that just that's not how it is in my context. And you
Right.
can just kind of
Mhm.
move on or drop your context on it. But I'm kind of looking to kind of tease that apart. So I think that's really cool that you have a one-to-one learning professional learning network with within your family to be able to kind of like, kind of
Mhm.
put mirrors and windows there to sort of like figure out like not only what is different but why it's different and how it became to be different. um
Mhm. Absolutely.
I don't know if I mentioned, yeah, I think I mentioned the in the on ramp talking about going to Orlando and actually getting to meet face to face someone that's in my learning network. So I got to spend some in real life time
Mhm.
with this teacher, and part of our conversation was about some of the hiring practices in Florida as this
Mhm.
individual has experienced it within their sort of like path. But he was also addressing, some of the statewide rules and regulations about being hired, and I was just mind blown. I was like, wow, like it was
Mhm.
so different than what I'd experienced.
Mhm.
But I can't pass judge, like there's no judgment. It was just, you just take it
Right.
in. You're not getting to any
Mhm.
judgment conclusion on it. There's nothing summative. It's just like that's how it is there.
Right.
And I was sort of mind blown. But I'm digging that right now to be able to sort of see behind it.
Mhm. My sister and I have to work very hard to not talk shop when we're together because the conversation generally lands in our respective experiences and realities in education. And I've taught most of my career in Ontario,
Mm.
and she's taught her entire career in Virginia with a little bit in Florida for a couple of years. But so yeah, just comparing and sharing and looking at the similarities and challenges, and at the end of the day, I think kids are kids, and just the realities in which we work and in which we teach. So it's really sometimes we have to like force ourselves to not talk shop and talk about life.
What's her area of focus in teaching?
She's a library and media
Okay.
specialist at a middle school. She previously taught history and government, but is really passionate about the library and research, teaching students research and thinking skills, having a very diverse and equitable uh, representation of her learners and the world within the library. So she's very busy. She's done a lot of work over the summer. She's a lifelong learner. She's really quite amazing.
Yeah, the risk, I can totally see the risk, getting drilling too far down into the edu combos. The second layer to that, like the one-to-one, cool, you two are
Mhm.
texting each other, you're phone calling, like if it's just kind of you two in the room, it's
Mhm.
always good to get to the other stuff, but that's also like, that's cool too, to be able to share that. For me, it's always the problem where, you know, myself and my spouse are both educators. It's when you
Mhm.
flock together and there's other people in the room and you start to realize, yeah, we should talk about something else. And then the problem will
Right.
be like, yeah, totally. Yeah, that totally reminds me of something that happened at a staff meeting today when we were talking about not talking about, like, oh my gosh, it just goes and goes and goes. There's just
Exactly.
so much space.
Mhm.
How did the shift of focus, or maybe it was just the emergence of taking on more special education uh, portfolio space in, how did that how did that kind of happen to sort of shift
Mhm.
I'll say shift away from literature focus, let's say, but again, I don't have the view. Like, what did it look like from the inside?
Right. Well, when I was teaching in the middle school in Virginia, I had students who, as we all do, students in our classes with an IEP, with learning needs, with emotional challenges, trauma in their lives, and so forth. And I realized I needed more. I needed more in my toolbox to teach them effectively and to understand their learning needs well. So when we moved to Ontario, I did my master's degree pretty much right away, moving here, and then in curriculum and instruction. And then I went in and did my special education qualifications again so that I could be better equipped in how to teach and support students with learning, with varying learning needs. And so I did my specialist one, or my 1, 2, 3, my specialist, my one, my two, and my specialist. And just fully enjoyed it. I enjoyed the challenge. I enjoyed sort of the learning of what a learning disability is, what are the compared to intellectual disability, how is that diagnosed, who's diagnosing it, what does that mean for their education, what does that mean for them as learners, what does it mean for them and the opportunities within a school, and what does it mean for us as teachers and our understanding of what a learning disability is and what students potential is. And I've always said, well, we have an industrialized model of education. Our model of education in North America has not changed since the Industrial Revolution, really. And we produce widgets, if I could oversimplify. And if you're not a widget and you don't fit into a mold, education can be very hard. Learning can be very hard for you. So looking at how do we vary our instructional and assessment practices or the structure of our day so that we can best support learners so that they can be the best that they can be moving into the world after high school. So again, it was a pretty selfish reason that I went into special education, because I wanted to be a better teacher. I wanted to serve students better. And that just led me on a path of continued learning and engagement. And I wanted to work with higher needs students. So I was teaching when my children were small. I taught part-time, and I just worked in the mornings, but I always wanted to work with higher needs students. And my opportunities to do that as a part-time teacher were limited just because of the nature of a community class and the needs that a community class had and a school had. So I eventually, when my when my own children were a little bit older, I went back to work full time and started teaching in a community class, and just read and learned and tried to really engage as much as I could. But it was also realizing that the students that we have in community classes or in a learning strategies class here in Ontario were the same students you might have in your straight curriculum or your quote unquote regular classes. So the strategies and the knowledge that you're using as a special education teacher are going to be valuable to you in a quote unquote regular math class or English class, because those strategies and techniques are going to reach a broad spectrum of students. So I just continued on that path of learning. And then at a certain point, I wanted more of a challenge. I wanted something different. I was reaching that itch in my career where something, I needed more. I needed learning. I needed change, but I didn't know what that change was going to be. And then an opportunity presented itself in our board to be a regional special education teacher working with students with highly aggressive or self-injurious behaviors. And I was fortunately successful in that, in interviewing for that posting. And I stayed on a regional team for about 5 years, either as first as a regional teacher and then as a special education consultant. And then I went from being a consultant to being an administrator, which I still have a passion for. Special ed, one of my favorite places to be in the school is to walk into a community class and hang out with those students and those teachers and see what they're doing. And so that's where I am.
I like the little bit of the call out as far as the sort of special education delivery model, or sorry, education model. My brain
Mm.
makes the connections to impact on special education delivery, and how, you know, when learning strategies courses are designed, they're designed with supporting the kid and also fulfilling the expectations of the guidance curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
We, there's the idea of differentiating that course and bending it and lifting it and bringing it to the student and sort of making sure that you find, I guess, a reasonably comfortable space of integrity with the course it's been a challenge for me, sort of like trying to figure out
Mm-hmm.
what that course currently looks like, what it could look like, what it should look like, and why I was never able to make it exactly what I wanted it to
Mm-hmm.
look like. It's that constant loop of self-reflection I find what the course is. I can remember a few years back, it might be almost coming up on a decade. I was at a talk, and there was an individual there that was a leader in a fairly prominent, I would say, a very prominent learning disabilities advocacy group within our jurisdiction. And at the end of the talk, I approached the individual and I asked just about their observations. They had been involved with this advocacy group for a good chunk of time and had done leadership within that group. So I thought, this is a good resource to touch base. They were partnered with uh, school boards and also local agencies. So I asked the individual, I said, in your sort of observations in the time that you've been associated with this particular association, I said, how would you sort of what comments would you have about the actual delivery and structure of learning strategies? Like, how have you observed it evolved and changed? And, does it need to be shaken out a little bit? And their response, I'm truncating it quite a bit, but at the heart of the response is that it hasn't changed in a long time. Like there isn't, and it was just kind of like it was just kind of flat, the
Mm-hmm.
statement. It wasn't necessarily saying that it should change, um, that it was in need of change, but the observation was that it hadn't changed. And then it's like, there's a whole bunch of people need to there's always the handshakes and other people you got to meet, so it's sort of like, okay, I didn't get to do
Mm-hmm.
any follow-up. But what is your, in the challenge of designing learning strategies classrooms, and I mean, we could extend that. I think what's interesting is that I think if we look at learning strategies classes against community classes, that the community classes, and this is my new experience because now I'm
Mm-hmm.
directly involved in a community class, and I look at the supports and the vibrancy is the wrong word, but it's really there's an energy and there's a design element to it that I find like I have a lot of learning to do, but I find like it's pretty rich. Like the resources and the people and the resources that I have access to are pretty dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kind of put what that experience looks like right now in a portfolio against my experience with learning strategies classes. And it's interesting when I think about the diversity of community classroom design in the different schools that I've been associated with, and the similarity of learning strategies design considering the different contexts that I've been in. And
Mm-hmm.
it's more, I'm presenting that idea to you, but what what are some of the cool, in your mind, like that's some of the cool elements of design or delivery that could be a part of learning strategies? Or maybe you kind of noticed somewhere and you thought, yeah, I would love to try and like get that rolling. Sort of what is it kind of catching your attention or did catch your attention that could kind of give a little bit of that vibrancy to learning strategies class? Now, I am a part of the cohort that is also, I'm going to say, in my measurement, not designing learning strategies classes very well. Like I'm a part of this. I am a part of this cohort that's I'm trying to figure it out. I'm trying to propose things, kind of dance and sort of like shake things up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But from your experience, were there elements that you're thinking, yeah, I just wish that we could kind of get to this with the learning strategies classes?
Mm-hmm. I think speaking for myself, teaching learning strategies, there's a mandated ministry curriculum, or
Hmm.
there's a board focus, and so you have resources available to you when you're just stepping into teaching special education and teaching a learning strategies class. That can be very comforting. I have a curriculum I can follow. I have teachers before me who've taught this class. I can lean on them, share their experiences and resources, and I can deliver this curriculum as it's laid out, and also be responsive to the students before me. You have a smaller group of students. You have maybe 16 students in the class, and you can sort of meld between the sorry, life is happening right now. My husband just walked in, so sorry. The you can go between or meld the teaching the curriculum and responding to the needs of the students before you, and you're I think in the learning strategies class, you can find opportunities for originality, for bringing in local context and student context, and really making something that it's in responsive to the students' needs, as well as leaning on that curriculum. Teaching a community class, there is no ministry mandated curriculum, which can be very comforting or be very intimidating or be very liberating. I chose the liberating route because while we didn't have a binder to pull off of a shelf and teach, you had students' IEPs, and you had their personalities, and you had their post-secondary goals, their families' post-secondary goals for them, and you can really cater to the students' needs and make it very multidisciplinary and thematic, and teach really new and exciting things that interested yourself and kept you excited, as well as was responsive to the needs of the students. So some things that I've seen recently that excite me about learning strategies is the focus on math skills than learning strategies. So there was a pilot program a couple of years ago regionally. I believe your school was involved, and learning strategies classes were taught with a math focus. So again, with the provincial and board focus on math skills, that was a very natural fit. And so, curriculum consultants and special education consultants were working with classroom teachers together in a collaborative way to bring in sort of the learning skills, the broader learning skills that and how they tied into math and teaching math, and how they then could be generalized into other areas of learning and other curriculum pieces. So that's kind of new and interesting. I really enjoyed being a part of that. Um, and then, but again, at learning strategies, I think it depends on the teacher and the school and the students before you and how you're going to structure your class. Because teaching learning strategies, you have that um, opportunity to structure your classes maybe in a way that's um, uh, appropriate for the context in which you're teaching. Uh, we at our school, I'm not sure if other schools do this, I'm sure they do. We have a English and Learning Strategies year-long program. So there's two teachers, and they sometimes co-teach or team teach. Sometimes it's two separate entities. Depends on how uh, that semester and that teaching pair prefers to do it. So the English and the learning strategies are combined with more of obviously a literacy focus. So, but I wish that learning strategies were maybe taught more generally across uh, all grades, because you can students typically take it in grade 9, grade 10, and then the enrollment drops off a little bit for grade 11 and 12 learning strategies. But I think the skills and concepts taught in those environments, as well as being a smaller environment with fewer students, is very supportive of learners.
I love the fact that so last year I was teaching grade 12 learning strategies,
Mhm.
and just the way the schedules have fallen, I'm flipping and I'm doing grade 9 learning strategies this upcoming year if
Mm,
my schedule stays the same.
right.
um, and what's you know I I taught grade 9 learning strategies. The last time I taught it was in my first year of teaching in a special education department. So, I'm in my 15th year of teaching. So
Mhm.
this would have been over a decade ago that I last taught the grade 9 learning strategies. Now, between that point and this point, I mean, I've had a lot of different learning experiences within the board, and different, ways to learn about how learning strategies overlap with um, wellness, and how learning strategies
Mhm.
overlap with some of our progressive discipline
Mhm.
spaces. Like, I've had a lot of really cool time to kind of simmer. So I'm really excited to come back and play with the nines again. So
Mhm.
there is an element of selfishness in me asking you this question, because I'm mining your brain a little bit.
Mhm.
Uh, because part of it, just before we left for the school year, there's another teacher that's also has a section. We sat down and we started to map out loosely um, what an updated version could look like,
Mhm. Mhm.
and we started looking at it thematically, as in
Mhm.
what are some of the areas that we would like to be able to put. We thought thematically gave us some of the mobility to
Mhm.
address the differentiation and the students, the humans that are in front of us in the classroom. So that'll be mid-August when we're touching base again to start putting some more pieces in place.
That's really interesting because one thing I enjoyed about teaching a community class is teaching things thematically because it allowed for so many entry points. Because as you know, in a community class, there's a variety, quite the disparity of learners in your
Mm-hmm.
classroom. So it provided entry points for all learners, and you could scaffold the concepts and skills and such. So it's exciting that you're going to be doing that with learning strategies as well. And you mentioned wellness, and I think that's a great area of need for all of us, no matter how we are engaged in the school, is managing our wellness and making us the best people that we can be to approach our day. So, and how we embed that in schools for students to in the very different reality in which our students are living, being constantly in front of a screen, and the impact that has on their brains and their attention and their learning, and your engagement with social media and so forth, which can be very exciting and powerful, but it has can a different studies and news articles have shown it can have an adverse effect on us as well. So how do we inject seamlessly and with intentionality uh, wellness into our day for our students, to teach them life skills and the social skills and the coping skills and the self-care skills that hopefully they're learning at home and are modeled at home as well. But if they're not, how do we support our students in that so they can really engage in the learning and be well and manage. Some of our students have very hard lives and have lived through some hard things. So how do we, with intentionality, embed wellness and equity and care in our instructional and assessment practices so that we're supporting our students and helping them be successful in all the ways that matter.
Hmm. It's interesting because there was some of the structured teaching bleeding over into
Mhm.
skill based, kind of like a little bit like competency based
Mm.
um, activities for the students. And we, because part of the, you and I, even you've shared wonderful resources with me, that idea of task analysis,
Mhm.
being able to break down and further break down the steps that lead to, a successful product or conversation, like that outcome. I brought that into the conversation as far as the grade 9 course, and we kind of landed
Mm.
on, we started talking about the different skills that we would like to support for our grade 9 cohort coming in.
Mm.
Stuff even as what seems as straightforward as navigation and orientation within the school, how to make appointments, where's the cafeteria, what does it mean to pay for
Mhm.
your own foods. So looking at and it's frustrating, and it's really small work, but going through those steps, I think, opened up our thinking about what um, some of the competencies that we would like students to feel a little bit more comfortable with coming out of the grade 9 course. So
Mhm.
I'll keep you looped on that, because
Yeah, definitely.
it's we don't know exactly where we're going to go with it, but we've been given space to kind of figure that out a little bit, which is
Right.
cool.
That's cool.
I got one more for you before we
Okay.
bust out. You cool with that?
I am.
So we landed kind of lightly on that idea. I use that example of the grade 9 student. The grade 9 student, you're not going back to grade 8. You're not going to Mr. Jones's
Mhm.
class in September. Um, if I sort of, I'm gonna elevate that to the shift you've recently made
Mm.
from I guess it's not from it's you've shifted into an
Mhm.
administrative role. And I'm curious about that sort of, almost that as a starting point to this combo. Let's see where it goes. But that idea that, yeah, you're not stepping back from the admin role. You're there. You're there now,
You're
and
in,
you're
yes.
you're you're in. And was there a moment where you thought, like, I'm beyond being handed the keys to the school, but was there any particular moment you're like, this is me now, like I'm now in this role?
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I've had long conversations with your wife about this. We're in similar situations. Um, yeah, and I think it's not just one moment. It's looping back to different moments, or these moments are surprising me throughout a week, a day, or whatever. It was like, oh my goodness, I'm a vice principal, and when we went through the coursework and we went through our what we call the selection process in our board, I said to myself, I trust the process. I trust our system. If they determine I'm not ready for this step, then I will trust that and I will go back and I will, reassess the things I need to do. But then I was successful out of the gate and I was placed rather quickly after completing my coursework. And I thought my mind shifted to what were they thinking? Like what are they doing putting me here? But it's just having faith that those who supported me through this process and those who saw something in me that maybe I didn't see in myself, knew that I was ready and I was capable, and I had what I needed to start this journey and start on this path and make this transition. Um, so from time to time, I think, oh my goodness, wow, look at where I am, and this is really interesting. But I think um, I approach everything, or I try to approach everything I do professionally from a lens of service. Um, I believe very much in the concept of being a servant leader, that I am here to serve the needs of my community and my students and my staff, or the staff I work with, my colleagues, my principal, and my fellow administrators. So how do I do that effectively? I need to know them and understand them and learn their context and advocate for them, and also um, uh, advocate for them, but also expose them to new learning when necessary, or help them find the learning resources that they're interested in to propel themselves along their learning journey. So um, it's, I think I think if I think of my position, if you think of the name of the position, or you sort of elevate the position of an administrator too much, it's easy to get away from that servant perspective. And I never want to do that. So I'm here to serve the needs of the school and lead in a way that is seeing the, just like we do with our students, we see the humans before us. When we work with a staff, and work with our colleagues, we're seeing them as humans first. And how do we support them and lead, and also, be an agent of the board for which work, and the ministry that creates our curriculum and sets our visions sometimes.
There's, and in the process, I'm familiar with the process, as you mentioned. Yeah, my spouse went through similar process, and
Mm-hmm.
it's, and to sort of trust in the process was something that I was mentioning in support of her progression through this. That there is a, this is rigor. This is,
Mm-hmm.
there's more than one person making a decision. There's conversations. There's a whole sort of backspace there that happens when you leave the table, and people are trying to figure out what's best for you, what's best for board, what's best for kids. Like, there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
discussion there. This is what I imagine. I too trust the process. This is what I put in there to say I trust the process.
Yeah.
Um, it's one of the things that, if I can puncture back through the process with you just for a moment, um, where are you reaching back to in your progression towards being in the process? Where do you find yourself going back into as like that? Like, I can do this because I did this. I see this a little bit because the process is tight, right? Like, what is it? 2 years, a 2 year, like maybe less than a 2 year if you do it really everything back to back to back.
Pretty much, yeah, about 2 years between the coursework and then
And that's
the
tight because there's a lot, like when the weight of those keys when they hand them to you, like they're
Mhm.
they're like they have the density of a star, I'm sure. Like, what has sort of the stuff that you're expected to sort of be able to manage with, with the role.
Yeah,
So where
yeah.
do you find yourself reaching back through, this training, this sort of like
Hmm.
moment in time of training where you're like, yeah, you know what, I can see how that particular experience kind of helped me out, like that set the shelf for me that I can put this learning on. Do you find yourself
Good question. Um, Through the coursework, I would say the readings and the conversations and the speakers and the learning that we did really helped lay a good foundation of the concept of school leadership and school context, everything from the operational needs to the forming a team and working with a team and moving people along, and working with people who might be resistant, or navigating challenging conversations between community members and teachers and schools and leadership and that sort of thing. So all of the sort of the conceptual, foundational, philosophical pieces that we navigated through helped sort of lay that foundation. But then, at least in our board, we have a lot of policy, or at least in our province, a lot of policy and procedure documents, policy documents within our board. So there's always something to fall back to be, to answer a question or to look at a procedure or policy. So that's comforting in the sense I have those resources. But I would say that the conversations and the exposure to other people who are in varying leadership positions, and having a broad set of experiences myself within education helped prepare me for this reality I'm finding myself in now. Uh, but I we read Brene Brown's Dare to Lead this year, in the past year, as an administrative team, and really appreciated the book. A lot of things resonated with me, but one one piece toward I think it was towards the end of the book, and she was profiling a particular industry leader or executive, and in very broad summary of what this person said, or paraphrasing. Basically, I don't know everything, but I know enough to ask the right questions. And I think that that permission to be vulnerable, that was definitely instilled in us through the coursework, and then reading writers such as Brene Brown. But to admit that and to be comfortable with you don't know everything, and you're a part of this network within our board and within our community that we can ask questions of, we can phone a friend, we can admit our vulnerability, and and draw on the expertise or the experiences of others. It's again, it's very comforting, and it's very liberating too, that I don't have to know everything right out of the gate, and I'm not
Mm-hmm.
going to know everything, but I know enough about the operational pieces and the policies and the why to my answer. So when you ask me a question, or you looking for something, I can give you an answer, but I can also give you the why. And you and I might not like that answer, and we may not see it as the best answer right now, but this is the why behind it, and this is what we sort of either have to do, or this is what is going to be the most equitable use of resources at this time. Um, uh, Having an answer, but also giving the why. And if I don't know an answer, I can say, I give myself permission to pause and to reach out to those people who can help me answer questions and navigate things. So, but I think it's just, I don't think there's one moment or one learning or one reading that I did that sort of said, yes, now I'm ready and I know I can do this because I did that. I think it was that the whole package, the whole experiences that I've had, and knowing that I'm such a new administrator. I'm going into my second year, and I'm going to play that newbie card for as long as I can,
Mm-hmm.
and and just know that we're all learning, and none of us is perfect, and the stakes may be a little high every now and then, but that whole what is the phrase when you're doing yard work? Call before you dig, and same sort of thing in leadership. Call before you
That's
dig,
good.
and make yeah. So
I like that too, and to tease out the Brene Brown example, is that I also do think you shouldn't know everything, and
mhm.
if that's part of the space of vulnerability, if you shouldn't know everything by default, if you're curious and you want to learn more, you have to be inclusive, so you have to
Mhm.
bring things in, right? You have to bring things in. Um, and part of that, that's the social currency for me of some of the things
Mhm.
that she's talked about. Is it's not only a way to, her vulnerability conversations are not only about kind of rebuilding your own operating system, but also kind of opening your eyes to how you build inclusivity. So how you bring things in to help support what you shouldn't know, you really shouldn't
Mhm.
know, and realizing that when you don't need to know that thing anymore, then it's a matter of going back into that community to get the support again, and you get this kind of elasticity, and then sharing that vulnerability factor. That was part of my takeaway with that book, and it never
Mhm.
specifically directed me there, but it just made me reflective of how necessary it is for me, even where I'm doing right now in the school that I'm in, is to just be able to walk somewhere and ask something.
Mhm.
It's a
Mhm.
complex, for some people that's a very complex activity, as in, there's the preamble, the sort of the setup, that, like everything else that happens with that communication, it happens, like social connections in a school, the timetable, like just be able to make those things. But for me, it's always taken of, like, for me to go and share space with someone, to have that conversation, and to just say,
Mhm.
I really have no idea how to do this thing, but I think
Abs-
you can help me.
Absolutely. And you've heard this saying before, I'm sure, or seen it online, where the best PD is the teacher down the hall,
Yeah.
and that's true for administrators as well. Like, to the things that I have the great fortune to experience through the instructional practices and assessment practices of my colleagues in the classroom, and seeing the great things that they're doing and the great things that they're interested in, and what they're pulling out of their students. And it's really exciting. And I learn more about what their needs are, what great things they're doing, and how I can highlight those in ways that matter, either just publicizing it to the community or advocating for their needs or their realities. And similarly, as an administrator, your wife is one of my friends that I phone when I have a
Mm-hmm.
question, or and there's other administrators who are new or who are more seasoned that I can tap into. And I wish that we had more intentional opportunities for educators to take advantage of that in a formal and intentional way, where you're not sacrificing your prep time or sacrificing your home time into tapping into that person down the hall or in the next school or in the next quadrant of our board. Like, if I know that Mr. Clough is doing some amazing things in his community class, how can I, as a teacher in the north end of the board, get down to the west end of the board to see that observation, either through Google Hangout or through it's a real time observation. So that's one thing that's intrigued and challenged me in recent years, is how do we build um, that opportunity for students, or sorry, for teachers and administrators to learn from one another, embedded into their days, um, and honoring the work that they do, and the need for their prep time and their time outside of the building.
Oh, geez, I feel a collaborative inquiry creeping up.
There you go.
So here's the last bits. I love that.
Mhm.
You name dropped Brene.
Mm.
Any other shout outs? Any other shout outs that you want to kind of just
Um,
tap on the
I'm so
shoulder? I know this wasn't on the question.
yeah.
Anyone that's
No, that's
listening, this is
okay.
not on the question framework. It's just
And
it's
I'm
brought to mind.
so bad at remembering names of authors,
You
and
could go anywhere.
but
Heck, you want to go back to your
well,
grade 11 art teacher. I've had people do that too. They're like, oh,
oh,
yes, that teacher just kind of like, I still remember that lesson that they gave me.
yeah. No, I just, a couple of things I'm just reading right now is the book Spark, and the author I don't know, but it's about the connection between physical activity and
Hmm.
cognition, and the impact on mood as well as mental health and learning. So that's a book that I sort of pick up from time to time and read through. And then Jennifer Moss, who spoke at Quest last year, Happiness at Work, and so basically more positive psychology types of material, and how to intentionally embed that or promote that or support that in a work environment. So those two pieces, and then I guess from a more personal, a couple of key moments in my life that sort of set me on my path professionally, was when started taking special education classes, and teaching special education. And so really that sort of sparked my interest and passion in supporting students and working with families who maybe their engagement with school and learning and life is going to be a bit more challenging than those that others may face. And then also, as far as leadership, my then principal, um, during a TPA, encouraged me to seek out leadership positions in the board. I literally laughed at her, and I thought, "You're out of your mind. There's no way. I'm a teacher. I'm not a leader." And she sort of turned it on its head for me. And she said, "Well, just think about it, marinate in it, and remember that." And I told her all of the reservations I had about pursuing leadership opportunities. And she said, never make a decision based on what you think a position is going to be like. Do your research, shadow people, talk to people. And that was very good life advice as well as professional advice. Never make a decision about what you think something is going to be like, but really dig in and get better acquainted with something, and make a decision with all your questions answered as much as you can.
It's good stuff. Can I share one? It just
Mhm.
came to mind.
Yes.
So it's in that spirit of me just not being a very good teacher in my first year. Um, this this past school year, a former student of mine, now not in my first couple years. I think her name's Brittany. Not in the first. I think I taught her in my third year, and it was in the hospitality class. So I had kind of figured out a few things, but she's my colleague. She's on a pat leave right now, paternity leave.
Hmm.
and she'll be back at some point. But I got an email once I sort of got the position at the school that I'm at, and it was from her, and she's like, "Is this the same person that taught me hospitality like 12 years ago?" I was like, "Oh, this is fantastic." So she's my mentor,
Oh,
and she
wow.
thinks I'm hilarious. So
Well, you
so
are. So.
so saving just a little bit of face, but it's an interesting kind of loop around.
Hmm.
It's kind of like getting the cards from the board as you make it through certain gateways of
Yeah.
service.
Right.
Teaching one of your students,
Hmm.
having a student come back as a colleague is one, and also say
Yes.
having a former student, a colleague that either gets married or is having a child, I think is another one. Like you just feel yourself,
Hmm.
I am becoming the older teacher in the room. So yeah.
Yes. It amazes me how much younger teachers are as I get
Oh,
older.
I was just before we ended the school year, we were having a little bit of a baby shower, and I'm actually standing there with another teacher that I'll say I was kind of connecting with them because I was thinking they're an older teacher too. And I'm like, man, I remember when I was sitting in this room too, like having our, like the teachers rallying to give you
Mhm.
gifts and stuff. So growth,
Yep.
growth and gray hair.
Yes.
Deb,
Got a little bit.
Deborah, thanks for hanging with me. I'll ask, is there, if any people want to reach out, have other conversations with you, any spaces that they could reach out to you?
Via Twitter probably would be easiest. I don't even know my
I love
address
it.
or my
I do
handle,
the
or
same.
whatever you might
I
call
do
it.
the same thing with my mobile phone. So we'll say, what's your number? And I have to pull it out, and
I don't know.
I can include it in the notes for sure.
Please. I think it's probably something very creative like Deb Austring or Deborah Austring at whatever Twitter. So if you just search my name on Twitter, you'll find me. It's not a very creative handle, I
I love
guess.
it.
Is
Well,
that
you know what? The clearer the better. I actually say, really, that helps. The clearer the better. So it's at D Austring on
there you
Twitter.
go.
There we go. Yeah, I had
There
our message board up, so I just kind of flipped over to it. Well, very cool. Enjoy the rest of your summertime,
you. You as well.
and yeah, that whole collaborative inquiry thing. If you want to talk about that, let's connect in September. We'll see if we can get something on paper. I'm curious about that too. I love the idea of both
Mm.
not only sort of cross school but cross panel sharing too, just to kind of figure
Mhm,
that out.
mhm.
It's
Absolutely.
really, I'll say it's really hard to find people that are open posting things, let's say, in that shareable fashion. It's difficult to find.
Well, I think it's a time factor. We're all so busy. Like as educators, we are very busy. So to find the opportunity to do something like that and post it via Twitter or elsewhere, um,
So how to
in
make
the
it more
midst of
fluid? The question is how to
how
make.
to make it
Yeah,
fluid and how to create those opportunities that are genuine, that aren't an add-on, right, to our very busy days.
I'm down with that. You good?
I'm good. Are you good?
I'm good.
Okay.
Let's get out of here. Have a fantastic day.
You too. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.